Are you ready to untangle from your past, recover from heartbreak, and revive your life? This is Soul CPR with your host, Ann Papayoti. We've all had soul-crushing experiences and lost ourselves in our pain, but there is a way out. On this podcast, Amazon best-selling author, award-winning life coach, and advice columnist Ann Papayoti helps us navigate the path from heartbreak to healing. So now, please welcome the host of Soul CPR, Ann Papayoti.
Hello, welcome to the show. If you are joining me in real time today, then we are on the heels of the tragic destruction and loss of life of Hurricane Helene. And in my support group last night, we were talking about feeling other people's pain and being empathetic, and how watching news can lead to feelings of despair and hopelessness, and even lead to depression. And what I mean by that would be situational depression, certainly not clinical depression. And if you're one of these people who can feel that deeply for other people, then I would encourage you to certainly limit your intake of news and to not let it be the last thing you see at night before going to bed, nor the first thing that you see in the morning. And also to recognize that when there's darkness in the world, the only opposition to that is light, and to be a light in the world. So we can't all go be hands-on help in these situations, or be boots on the ground, as they say, but we can do something. So what's that thing that you can do? Whether it's to donate food or clothing or money to an organization that is local and helping, or just to be a light in the world in general, which might mean to go help a neighbor or a friend, or even do something positive and uplifting for yourself. Again, the only opposition to dark is light, and the more light that we can bring, the less dark can reign. Before we move on to today's topic, I do want to share some conversations that I had following last week's show on the ugly cost of beauty standards, and what a hot topic that was in its own right. And first of all, did I not find myself going right down the rabbit hole on social media after researching and talking about this topic with you all? Yep, right there on my Instagram feed popped up Ellen DeGeneres's new skincare line, and it spoke directly to my pain points. Absolutely. And I didn't fully bite into the marketing. I eventually scrolled past, and then another ad popped up for it with like a discount trying to pull me back in. And I started going down the rabbit hole, and then I backed myself out. But man, anyway, I am sure that the products do feel good. And if used regularly, like any skincare product, would improve the look and feel of my skin from regularly cleansing and moisturizing. But like my dermatologist said about sunscreen, most people don't use products as directed, and therefore miss out on the full benefit. But regardless, it's really about, as we said last week, it's about what feels good and what you're willing to pay. As we learned from the research done by the show Science versus There Is No Youth in a Bottle. And what we all have to recognize from a needle or a knife, it is, well, what you see is what you get. And it's a very personal decision. And it's important to just know your why and what's the outcome you truly want. And if you're searching for happiness that way, science has also proven that outcome to be temporary. So like my conversations with listeners and clients since, really the most beautiful thing about all of us is how we treat one another and ourselves. And that, my friends, is an inside job. Oh, and it was Kanye West was the name I couldn't think of last week, who is the ex to beauty influencer Kim Kardashian, whose mom I was referencing, who had passed away from complications following cosmetic surgery. that had made headlines, of course. And there, of course, is not only an ugly side, but a dangerous side to beauty at times. The other thing about this being a hot topic was also last week, I was up late watching Jimmy Fallon, and one of his guests was Demi Moore. And she has a movie that just recently came out called The Substance, and it is all about this topic. It looks incredible and scary at the same time about the pursuit of youth and beauty at any cost. And it's actually classified as horror and sci-fi. Let that kind of steep for a moment. So if you haven't heard about it and this topic interests you, check it out. I know I certainly will. Now, today's topic is also about perhaps fine lines and those deep furrowed ruts as well, but not the ones on our faces. Today's topic is all about boundaries, what they are and how they can create healthy relationships and maintain them, or how they can be abused and used for manipulation and control. So let's start with what a boundary is actually intended to be. They're meant to foster respect and understanding and mutual growth in relationships. Because relationships matter, don't they? They do. But people who are able to set and maintain boundaries properly not only demonstrate self-respect, but as I said, mutual respect for the other person they're in relationship with. So what are boundaries? They are literally like invisible property lines that serve as like a critical framework that defines space between individuals. So it's where I end and you begin. You know how they say good fences make good neighbors? Well, good or healthy boundaries make good or healthy relationships. So they're crucial for making and creating and maintaining relationships, whether they're personal or professional. And they're also for maintaining balance in life and your overall personal well-being. And if you use boundaries appropriately, you're actually showing ownership for and responsibility for your life. Now, that's a lot to take in, I know. Now, most of my clients will say to me, I was never taught how to set boundaries. And I get that. I say, yeah, I know it's something that can be learned. It's never too late, but it's something we kind of absorb through observation and experience as children. Perhaps my favorite resource or book on the topic is simply titled Boundaries by Drs. Henry Cloud and John Townsend. And in their work, they help us understand that we were created for connection. We need connection. We need to be in relationship with others, and boundaries are how we identify and protect who we are and separate ourselves from others in relationships. They explain that we need to bond, to trust, and to feel supported by others, and that attachment is the foundation of all relationships. And of course, attachment begins at birth, right? It does. So we came into this world needing to bond with our mother, to feel safe, to feel secure, to have our very basic needs met. And then our mother helps us integrate into other relationships and to attach to others. Dad, perhaps, grandparents, other caregivers, extended family. And that's how our world starts to become larger. And as we grow, we begin to kind of discern where we feel safe and secure, accepted, supported, and loved. Makes sense so far? And so boundaries, or perhaps a lack thereof, begin to be observed in those who are in our world with whom we are attached. And we begin to set our own, or we try to. So here's maybe a very basic example that I think we can all grasp of a child kind of figuring out their world and learning a boundary, whether it's mutually respectful or not. So a child who was allowed to say they were full and not forced to clean their plate was taught to notice the limit of their hunger. Okay? Notice the limit of their hunger and that they had a voice about that limit. And in return, their parent may have also had a boundary that respected their child's voice and their awareness and that capacity of fullness. But that also then the parent had a boundary that said that dessert only was offered if dinner was first completed. So if you're too full for dinner, you're too full for dessert, right? Some of us may have heard that in our lifetime or have stated that in our lifetime. So both the remaining dinner and the dessert could be put back for the child when they once again feel hungry. So the parent had a boundary, but they respected the child's boundary. So what I hear in that example is both set a boundary and both respected it. The child said, that's fine, right? So you're giving the child the opportunity to have a voice, to set a limit, and you're also setting a boundary as a parent. So our formation of boundaries started with these early attachments. And when those attachments, however, are flawed in some way, as many who have childhood issues or estrangements were, boundaries may not be developed because autonomy may have not been developed or discerned at least or respected in some way. And therefore, we may end up repeating patterns of abandonment or people pleasing or even manipulating just to get what we need from others. Okay, so when we're unsure if we are loved or accepted or supported or safe, secure, we end up being left with just a couple of options. So Cloud and Townsend say, one, we either set limits feeling there's a risk, right? A risk that we're going to lose the relationship when we set a limit because they might stop loving us, and that's scary. If we set a limit with someone and we feel that we might not be loved because of it, it sets us up for abandonment. Or we don't set limits and we remain a prisoner to someone else's wishes, desires upon us. There's no autonomy there. I'm going to add a third one to that. We learn to manipulate, to control a relationship with what we think are boundaries. But this is really emotional abuse, if you will, and manipulation. So there's a lot happening in the world of boundaries. Boundaries, there's different types of boundaries, right? There's physical boundaries, geographical boundaries, space, time. Words are used for boundaries. There are functional boundaries. Functional boundaries, some of us may be very good with boundaries that involve creating or completing projects and tasks that have time and budgets and all of that, but we may be struggling with relational boundaries, being able to speak up and say no to someone when it's going to deplete us. So understanding boundaries and learning how to not avoid conflict out of fear of abandonment, or to be able to confront and say without it being rude or confrontational, without it becoming a manipulation, not letting it be some way to control, and yet letting it be a way to take ownership and responsibility for our own outcomes is really the goal of boundaries. And it's actually respecting the other person when it's done properly. So those who did not learn how to set and maintain boundaries correctly either become what? Boundaryless, or they do end up confusing them and using them to control. So in my experience, I've taught classes in boundaries before, some people have walls, right? Walls for boundaries. And other people have just nothing. And other people have tried, they've kind of draw a line in the sand and then they draw it again, and they've drawn it 32 times with the same person over the same thing. Well, we teach people how to treat us, as they say. Boundaries are for you. And if you don't respect your own boundary, because the boundary is actually for you, if you don't respect it, how can anyone else? And that's what we mean by we teach people how to treat us. It is time for our first break. So don't go far, because when we come back, we're going to get into what boundaries actually are not. I'll see you soon.
Mike Zorek, a three-time California state champion in Greco-Roman wrestling at 114 pounds. Mike, blind since birth, was born in Hartford, Connecticut. He was a six-time national placer, including 2 seconds, 2/3, and 2/4. He also won the Veterans Folk-Style Wrestling twice at 152 pounds. In all these tournaments, he was the only blind competitor. Nancy Zorek, a creative spirit whose talents have taken her to the stage and into galleries and exhibitions in several states. Her father, a commercial artist who shared his instruments with his daughter and helped her fine-tune her natural abilities, influenced her decision to follow in his footsteps. Ms. Zorek has enjoyed a fruitful career doing what she loves. Listen Saturday mornings at 12 Eastern for the Nancy and Mike Show for heartwarming stories and interesting talk on the BBM Global Network.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of the Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on the Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me today on Soul CPR. We are talking about boundaries, and are they healthy, or are they actually creating barriers in your relationships? So, thinking about a boundary, when I say taking responsibility and ownership for your life, you have to know who you are and what you stand for before you can use a boundary to actually protect it. And boundaries are designed to protect. So if you think of yourself like a piece of property, a piece of land, let's use that word. Property doesn't sound good in this context, perhaps, but a piece of land, and you put a fence around it so you can differentiate where your piece of property or land ends and your neighbor's begins. That piece of land is defined by that fence. Now, within that fence line is, you may build a house, you may have a garden, you may have all these things. That is you and yours. So understanding what's all in your garden and what your house is built of, that is you. And knowing that, and then having a gate and welcoming others in, but also knowing when to tell others to leave, whether that's thoughts, beliefs, values. It's not necessarily always people. So there's so much here. And of course, I can't teach a whole boundaries class here on a podcast, but there's so much about boundaries. But bottom line is, you have to know who you are before you can build a fence around yourself. and truly have protective boundaries, restorative boundaries, preventative boundaries. There's so much about boundaries that I can't get in today, but I do want you to understand at least the concept that boundaries are what your limits, what you allow and do not allow, and they're for you. And people confuse them and they point to other people. I set a boundary with them. It's really for you, and you're the one who has to honor it. And I teach boundaries like baseball. You're responsible for yourself and to others. So you're going to communicate the boundary because they have to understand where the line is. And that's how you respect other people. If you're not clear, then they don't know they've crossed onto your land, do they? So that's about being clear. Now, 32 times is too many times to tell them, right? So there's a way of respecting yourself and respecting them in about communication. I teach it like baseball, 3 strikes. First time, you take ownership and say, perhaps you didn't understand, let me communicate more clearly. Second time, you've communicated clearly. Now, they've crossed knowing. So it's a firmer conversation. And here comes, you state what the consequence will be if strike 3 happens. Now, I don't always believe you have to state what the consequence will be out loud, but you have to know what it is, because guess who has to implement the consequence? You do. And that's where if it got to 32 times, you are the one who didn't honor your boundary. Okay, moving on. That's just a quick and dirty boundaries 101. But let's talk about what boundaries are not, because this is where I see a lot of family estrangement by people confusing what a boundary is and using it to manipulate and control. And sometimes we may do it not even understanding that that's what we're doing. So a boundary is not control. It is not trying to control what someone else will or will not do. It's not about changing the way someone else will live their life. It's not to hold someone hostage or to meet your expectations or demands. Okay? I've witnessed some very intelligent and intellectual people behave extremely punishing with the concept of boundaries, and others unable to implement them at all in some of the most important relationships in their lives. But boundaries, when healthy, are about protecting your well-being, about setting limits and ensuring mutual respect in these very important relationships. However, they become about control and manipulation when they're misused to dominate or restrict others in unfair or harmful ways. So here are some ways that they may be misused and misunderstood. So when boundaries are used as ultimatums, okay? Now you heard me say, if you, then I will. That's a consequence. But as an ultimatum, instead of using a boundary to protect yourself, they could be disguised as an ultimatum. And this is an example, like if you don't do something, then I'm going to withdraw my love from you. I'm going to withdraw. I'm going to hold back something that's important in this relationship. And remember that thread of security and love that we were talking about in the beginning with the attachment. So it's intended to coerce the other person into acting against their will, to not fear the rejection in the relationship. Okay. Another way that they could be used is as for manipulation is when the goalposts constantly move, right? So I said the line was here. Well, now it's here. Well, now it's here. And now it's here. So that's a manipulative dynamic when they're constantly changing what's acceptable and what's not. And you keep the other person confused. Well, you can't visit here. Well, now you can't visit then. Well, no, that visit's not allowed. This visit is not. It keeps the other person off balance and controlled and emotionally harmed. If you use the boundary as a weapon for punishment, I use the word punishing, that I've had people tell me they feel punished by someone in their life. So again, this is usually an emotional withdrawal from someone without reasonable cause. It is manipulative. So healthy boundaries are really, again, they're about self-protection, but they're not about controlling someone else's emotions or behaviors to punish them. And when that happens, you need to step back, or if you're the one doing this, step back and really ask yourself, what is the purpose of what I'm doing? And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But if you're refusing to compromise, or this person's refusing to compromise, then it sounds like there could be a lack of respect. So again, really analyze what's going on here, because a lack of compromise sounds like it could lack open communication and genuine boundaries, because without dialogue in a relationship, without communication, there could be a control tactic at play here. Sometimes controlling narratives can start taking place, like changing the truth of what's happening but in a relationship. And that dialogue becomes, again, it can become punishing, and it's violating what a boundary really was in the first place, and or accusing someone of violating a boundary when they didn't even know what the boundary was. The fence line wasn't visible, right? So so being accused of violating a boundary when it wasn't clearly communicated becomes a way to exert power over someone and to make them feel guilty and keep them in their place. So understanding this distinction between what a genuine boundary is and what a controlling, manipulative behavior is critical. So the word boundary is really, it's become sort of a term that's used loosely and incorrectly sometimes. But true boundaries empower both people in a relationship and protects both of them. It defines the relationship. Good fences make good neighbors. Everybody's in a good place, and it respects the autonomy of both. Now, why do people want to control someone else? That becomes the question that I get really curious about. Why? So we can look at this, and then we can have empathy or compassion, and perhaps see it, and then whether it's for ourselves or the person who's actually exerting this, or maybe at least understand them. So some of the whys include fear of vulnerability or rejection. So all of this can go back to past trauma for this person, or again, what were the attachments in their childhood? What were the early attachments? What did they learn then, right? So fear of vulnerability or rejection. And that becomes this time in their life where now they're going to try to control and keep someone in relationship, keep them close somehow by making them fear loss. It's an ugly game. It really is. But what about just insecurity? Insecurity or low self-esteem, because using boundaries to control others when you have a low self-confidence or low self-worth, it kind of compensates for your own inadequacy. If you can be superior to someone, and if you can keep someone feeling less secure than you, again, it's not a pretty game. Something like, here's an example: if you truly love me, you wouldn't need to spend time with your friends. I would be enough. So seeking this validation in this way and setting this kind of a boundary controls somebody else's actions. What about desire for power and control, just that desire for power and control can show up. The psychologists tell us, and they become unreasonable and unchangeable, and it creates an imbalance in the relationship, the power control dynamic, and the other person's constantly seeking approval from the one in power. I'm curious if you hear or see yourself in any of these examples, or someone in your life, on which side you're in. But certainly there's some unresolved trauma, trust issues, probably, for anyone on either side of these issues. But the past is always going to rear its ugly head, but they may fear others may hurt or betray them, so they're going to hold on tight. And when we hold on too tight to something, what usually happens? Yeah, you might can think what can happen when you hold on too tight. So people who have to know your every move, or everyone you spoke to in a given period of time. But there's definitely also, I believe, a lack of awareness, self-awareness, which also plays into what we now call emotional intelligence, will come to play in the need to control others. And this is of use of boundaries to control people, sets up that dynamic. And this is when somebody may say they need space after an argument, which can be a very healthy thing to do, is to take space and to communicate that. But when it is used and abused, meaning taking an unhealthy period of time, intentionally creating suffering in the other person rather than resolving conflict, it has now crossed over into emotional abuse. It's one thing to take space, to gather yourself. It's another thing to emotionally withdraw and not resolve the conflict. It becomes a form of emotional control. Quickly, before we go to break again, anyone who has difficulty handling conflict, speaking of that, may just be avoiding. Just avoid. So they go into withdrawal and they're not even aware that they're manipulating. And so it could be just that lack of awareness that leads them to withdraw and walk away from dealing with conflict in a relationship, and not even realizing the harm they're causing, distress to the other person, by not solving the issue in the relationship. And most likely, whatever of any of those reasons, that they are manipulating boundaries as a way to control a relationship, is a learned behavior from childhood, and from their early attachments. All right, it is time for our second break, so don't go far. When we come back, we'll be more with Boundaries and Soul CPR.
Dr. RC will share extraordinary resources and services that promote educational success, as well as making a difference in the lives of all social workers, as well as the lives of children, adolescents, and teens of today. She will have open discussions addressing many of the issues that we face about our youth, and how being employed in the uniquely skilled profession of social work for over 18 years has taught invaluable lessons through her personal experiences. She will also provide real-life facts, examples, and personal stories that will confirm that why serving as a child advocate is extremely beneficial when addressing the needs of the whole child. Listen live to Dare to Soar, Saturdays, 10 a.m. Eastern on the BBM Global Network, and tune in radio as Dr. RC will provide thought-provoking information that will empower, encourage, and strengthen students, families, and communities across our nation. You can also visit her at soarwithkatie.com. Author, radio show host, and coach John M. Hawkins reveals strategies to help gain perspective, build confidence, find clarity, achieve goals. John M. Hawkins' new book, Coached to Greatness: Unlock Your Full Potential with Limitless Growth, published by iUniverse. Hawkins reveals strategies to help readers accomplish more. He believes the book can coach them to greatness. Hawkins says that the best athletes get to the top of their sport with the help of coaches, mentors, and others. He shares guidance that helps readers reflect on what motivates them, rediscover and assess their core values, philosophies, and competencies, find settings that allow them to be the most productive, and track their progress towards accomplishing goals. Listen to John Hawkins' My Strategy, Saturdays, 1 p.m. Eastern on the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again for joining me today. I just had a surprise drop-in visit from Chris, my son, who's the psychology major, who was my intern this summer. So that was fun. I knew the dog had been barking as someone came in the door, but now I was like, okay, I hope they're supposed to be here, whoever's here. Anyway, that was lovely. Going back to boundaries, ultimately the misuse of boundaries for control comes from someone's underlying emotional needs, their insecurities, their fears, and understanding the root causes and addressing those behaviors. These people also can learn to create healthy relationships and get beyond these barriers in their lives that are creating undue stress for themselves and others. So if you hear yourself or someone you know in those scenarios, then I encourage guidance, counseling, therapy, coaching. Okay, now let's talk about a behavior that I hear about often in my business when people come to me for guidance and coaching, and it's about estrangement. And so that withdrawal that we were talking about, emotional withdrawal, and it comes in the form of simply ghosting. I'm sure many of you have heard that term. Ghosting. So ghosting, as you may know, is the act of abruptly ending all communication with someone without explanation. This is not an example of setting a boundary, shall we say. This is an act of avoidance. This is an act of avoidance. Some may label it cowardice or defiance, but regardless, it comes from a negative thought, which creates a negative feeling and therefore becomes a negative action or behavior. And it is not a boundary. Why? There's no communication. There's no respect. And it induces harm. And that's the least of it, right? Mental health research on the psychological impact of ghosting is clear on its consequences. First of all, it is rejection. It is ostracism. It communicates you are not worthy of my time and attention. And the impact of this includes self-doubt, anger, sadness, resentment, and confusion. And long-term effects show increasing self-blame and difficulty trusting others. And that's for the recipient on the end of ghosting. Now, according to research published in Psychology Today, 50% at least of those who ghosted others went through their own emotional traumas afterwards, feeling guilt and remorse. Wow. So, have you ever been ghosted? Have you ever experienced the trauma of ghosting? We hear about it often in the dating world but usually early on when someone doesn't know how to say, I don't want to go out on the second or third date. But when it's in an important relationship, a family relationship, creating familial estrangement, ghosting. So I'm going to read a scenario to you that happened to one of my clients. It's an example. Woman's on the phone with her adult daughter. The daughter shares a problem between her husband and her mother-in-law. The woman listens intently and offers support. But when they get off the phone, she continues thinking about what her daughter had shared, and she felt pulled to write her with some guidance. And she felt she had some wisdom in this area. She'd experienced something similar when she was a young wife. So she had emailed her daughter, and her daughter wrote back, but with hostility and anger, telling her mother she'd crossed the line, that it was none of her business. The mother was confused. She did not know where the line was to have crossed it, and her intention was only to be helpful and to continue being supportive. So now she was confused and hurt by her daughter's lashing out. Her daughter stopped speaking to her, and they became estranged. Her daughter called it a boundary. Her mother called it punishment. What would you call it? Now, here's the thing. Maybe the daughter did not want any guidance or her mother's experience or wisdom. She didn't ask for that, right? But did we hear a boundary set? Was there communication about that? Was there respect? Was there an opportunity for mom to understand? No. So what I want to say is love the person, hate the behavior, if you will. Stay connected to the relationships that matter most and deal with the problem. The biggest thing I see in boundary issues in my business are people withdrawing from people, conflict avoidance, being unable to disagree, and or the people-pleasing side, right? I see the people-pleasing a lot. And it's not about not disagreeing. It's not about not being angry. But the withdrawing is so painful. There's so many estrangements that could be avoided. So again, love the person, hate the behavior. That is emotional blackmail. Children learn to interpret. When I am good, I am loved. When I am bad, I'm not. I'm not lovable. Adults learn when I'm agreeable or meet your expectations, I'm in. And when I voice a contrary opinion or I disappoint you, I'm cut off. What do you hear? Or what have you heard in your relationships? Are you dealing with a boundary situation now? Do you struggle with boundaries? Are your boundaries too rigid, too loose? Are they just right, as Goldilocks would say? Where are you with boundaries? Where are you with knowing yourself first and what you stand for? And all that would be in your garden, your beliefs, your thoughts, your dreams, your desires, your goals, your vision for your life. All of these things are within that garden. We said that you would put a fence around. And as we learn and grow and invite new ideas in, we can redecorate that house and we can plant new things in our garden, and we have to weed it out from time to time, and friends will come and go, and even relationships will. But there are some that we put walls around and keep people out, and there are some that we let wolves in, if you will. And I like to say they poop on our doormat. So we have to kind of really, really get to know ourselves, take ownership for ourselves and responsibility. Because if we don't, somebody else definitely will. And I say that literally. I had a row of hedges that defined my yard from my neighbor's yard at one time where I lived in Alabama. And I had gone through divorce. I was a single mom, and those hedges were tall, and I wasn't keeping them trimmed. I wasn't taking care, responsible. I wasn't a responsible gardener of those hedges, and I was away. I worked for an airline, and I was away for the weekend. And when I got back, my neighbor had cut down my hedges. Now, he did not have the right to do that, but because I had not taken ownership in his mind of them, he took over. So no, people will walk in your life and take over if you don't show responsibility for and ownership of your life. Now, I stepped up and spoke up and found my voice, and he replanted hedges on our property line. Anyway, just to share that. It is time for our third and final break. And when we come back, I'll share my closing thoughts on today's show. And I'd love to hear from you if you have any thoughts on boundaries, if you've had any experience with them, positive or negative. What worked for you and what didn't. Don't go far. We'll be back with more Soul CPR.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of the Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on the Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Mike Zorek, a 3-time California state champion in Greco-Roman wrestling at 114 pounds. Mike, blind since birth, was born in Hartford, Connecticut. He was a 6-time national placer, including 2 seconds, 2 thirds, and 2 fourths. He also won the Veterans Folk-Style Wrestling twice at 152 pounds. In all these tournaments, he was the only blind competitor. Nancy Zorek, a creative spirit whose talents have taken her to the stage and into galleries and exhibitions in several states. Her father, a commercial artist who shared his instruments with his daughter and helped her fine-tune her natural abilities, influenced her decision to follow in his footsteps. Ms. Zorek has enjoyed a fruitful career doing what she loves. Listen Saturday mornings at 12 Eastern for the Nancy and Mike Show for heartwarming stories and interesting talk on the BBM Global Network.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today and for watching on demand. If that is when you're getting to see or listen to today's show about boundaries, it is a big topic, isn't it? And the more we talk about them, the more I can think to say, but really, it's something I encourage you to go back and maybe reflect on and think about your life and boundaries and how you're doing with them. And maybe they're strong in one area, too rigid in others, and too loose in others, non-existent, boundaryless, or maybe you've got it. You've learned and got them just right in your life, but I do hope that today's show gave you some insight to reflect on this highly important ingredient for overall well-being, for life balance, for life wellness, for the health of your relationships personally and professionally. And if you agree with my philosophy that we're in relationship with everyone and everything, from our finances to our food to our friends and our family and beyond, then boundaries are truly key to our success in all of these areas. right? So I have to have boundaries on how many Girl Scout cookies I can eat in one sitting. I have to have boundaries on my spending. Again, there are limits and they're what we allow. So you can think of boundaries in literally every category of life. So when I think about what my key takeaway would be today, I mean, obviously, I think about the definition of boundaries, that they can be to respect autonomy and feelings of both parties to foster healthy relationships, or they can be confused and used to control and manipulate others, causing harm and distress. But also the fact that knowing how to set and maintain boundaries is really about knowing how to love yourself and how to love others. And if it's something you need to learn or to work on, you're not alone, because like anything to be mastered, it's something that has to be practiced. And you'll make mistakes, and because that's part of being human, right? And mistakes are really, when I think about mistakes, are just lessons in disguise. They really are. And when we can embrace that, we can say, wow, okay, so it was 32 times, but it doesn't have to be 33 times. So in that line of thought, the only mistake is not learning, as they say. And mistakes are always forgivable. They're always forgivable if we have the courage to admit them. And I really love that. I think we're going to have to do a show on forgiveness eventually. But coming up this month, I do have some incredible guests who are going to share their stories and their gifts and their wisdom with you. And if you're new to the show, first of all, welcome. And I'd also like to share that I have a retreat coming up. I'm hosting my second Destination Soul CPR retreat, and it's going to be all about self-love. And it's February 13th to 18th in next year, 2025, held in a private villa in San Salvador. Stunning views of the Pacific Ocean as the backdrop. So you can visit my homepage on skyviewcoaching.com to see the retreat banner and get more details. If you have any further questions, of course, go to the Connect page and reach out to me. And while you're on my site, be sure and sign up for the newsletter to stay up to date on the retreat courses and other offerings, because my clients keep asking me for a course on boundaries. I used to deliver a live course, and they've convinced me to turn it into an online course to be able to offer it to more people. So know that is in the works. And if you're interested in that, maybe drop me a line and let me know that, and I'll start picking up the pace to get that out. But if today's show resonated with you, then please share this podcast with someone who may need a lifeline of their own, or may be struggling with boundaries in their life. Then do share it, and subscribe, rate, and leave a review to help us reach more hearts. We greatly appreciate it. You can connect with me on social media. It's at Skyview Coaching on Facebook, or at Ann Papayotti on LinkedIn, X, and Instagram. And of course, as I want you to always remember that healing is not linear. It is a process of profound transformation. Again, I appreciate your being with me today, and do always, always, always open your hearts to others, love openly, and live soulfully. I'll see you next time.
This has been Soul CPR with host Ann Papayotti. Breathe life back into your spirit with each episode, where she and special guests explore the relationships that hurt us and discover that healing can only begin with you. Tuesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern on the Bold Brave TV network.